When you think of the term romantasy, your mind may immediately flicker to the ACOTAR series. You may even think of the Powerless series, Red Queen, or even The Cruel Prince. But probably one of the most influential romantasy series to date is the Fourth Wing series by Rebecca Yarros, a book that was published in April 5th of 2023 and took the book community by storm. Fourth Wing was Rebecca Yarros' big debut novel into the new adult romantasy genre. Previously, she focused more on military romance books, but the Fourth Wing series is definitely the series that Rebecca Yarros is most known for now. Now, this book I would describe as a quintessential romantasy book. It has redefined the genre in what I believe to be a very negative way. For those of you who don't know, romantasy combines the genres of romance and fantasy together. These two are interlinked and essentially codependent on each other. The only problem is that authors like Rebecca Yarros tend to focus more on the romance aspect of the romantasy genre, therefore weakening her world building and her story overall. And this critique of mine does continue throughout the entire series. The only issue with books like Fourth Wing is that they try to have the best of both worlds without putting in the actual work to make that book worth reading. And Rebecca Yarros is no stranger to these critiques. Her world building is lackluster at best and lazy at worst. The character arcs are incredibly redundant and disengaging, not to mention the juvenile dialogue that presents this book as more of a YA fantasy novel, despite the graphic smut scenes throughout. Personally, for me, if you extrapolated those scenes out of the book, this entire series would fall more into the YA fantasy genre. This book is essentially Red Queen mixed with How to Train Your Dragon, with just a little essence of Divergent thrown in for good measure. After all, it does follow the same checklist that Red Queen follows. Our female main character discovers that she is imbued with great power and finds that she is actually not only the exception to the rule, but is actually more powerful and more special than anyone else. She has a love triangle with a broody, moody boy and a nice guy, who turns out not to be so nice at the end of the day. Then she realizes that the government or monarchy is actually corrupt and is withholding information from its citizens and putting them in more potential danger. Our female main character falls for the broody, moody boy and finds out her brother, who she presumed was dead, is actually alive and well and fighting for the resistance. Rebecca Yarros essentially copied and pasted this plot into Fourth Wing, added just a sprinkle of dragons, and called it a day. And the whole Hunger Games relation is actually a pretty distant relation. Hunger Games and Fourth Wing do have similar tropes, but they have a very different execution of these said tropes. People in Hunger Games have to die, whereas the soldiers who fight in the Basgiath War College do not. There is also a love triangle, but truth be told, that is a very popular trope, and you see that throughout various books in very different genres, so it's not exactly singular to the Hunger Games or Fourth Wing series. In my personal opinion, Fourth Wing definitely has much more distinctive similarities between Red Queen and Divergent. Personally, I prefer Fourth Wing's predecessor because, in my opinion, the entire premise of a murder college is actually quite silly once you think about it for more than 5 minutes. I don't exactly get the sentiment of why people would be motivated to send their kids to a college notorious for killing its students. Why on earth would anyone let this happen? I have no idea. The propaganda must be very strong with this one. And like I mentioned before, this series is also very reminiscent of the Divergent series, mainly with the entire aesthetic of the hand-to-hand combat, the tattoos, the dyed hair. I'm not exactly sure how a murder college has access to hair dye, but that is a conversation for another time. Not to mention the technology in the series is quite muddled. They have ready access to indoor plumbing, rubber shoes, a printing press, crossbows, pens, but no guns. Kind of surprising that at a war college they don't have more advanced weapon technology, outside of the realm of bows and arrows and knives. And this lack of technology may have something to do with why they are losing to a bunch of birds. But despite her questionable world-building tactics, Rebecca Yarros has received a lot of praise for incorporating disability representation into Fourth Wing in the form of her self-insert character Violet, who suffers from hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, similar to Rebecca Yarros herself. Rebecca Yarros has also received praise for her diverse cast, with characters like Xaden and Rhiannon, a female character who dates other women at the college. But the praises did not last long, as Rebecca Yarros' political views came to the surface surrounding the Israel and Palestine conflict, in which she identified as a Zionist. And now the author is almost as controversial as the book itself. Fourth Wing has certainly caused a lot of debate, and the real question everyone seems to be asking is Fourth Wing even worth the hype? And that is a question we're going to be answering today. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Madi Kay, this is my big chair, and today we're going to be talking about the BookTok sensation Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. And before we get into the book, I do want to warn you there will be spoilers ahead, so if you have not read this book yet, feel free to sign off and come back to this video when you are done. And I do also want to warn you about some pretty disturbing content that exists in these books in the form of gore, violence, injuries surrounding Ehlers-Danlos Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, as well as pretty graphic sex scenes. And that should be it. And also I do want to reiterate the fact that just because I don't like a book, that does not mean I think you shouldn't like it either. Everyone is entitled to their own opinions, especially in the very subjective world of art and literature. I'm just your friendly neighborhood book vlogger, a random stranger on the internet, talking about a book I do not like. Feel free to share your opinions on the book, even if you disagree with me and you like the series. I always like to hear what people really enjoy because they are obviously having a very different experience than I am. And if you like this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to get notifications. I am working on the Onyx Storm deep dive video. Apologies that it's taking so long. I recently just got over a really nasty bout of pneumonia, which is why my voice kind of does sound a little bit hoarse right now. I'm still struggling to get fully 100% back to my usual self, so I apologize for my very long hiatus. I'm getting back into my normal filming schedule, and I will be putting out way more videos in the near distant future, but thank you all for your patience. Stay healthy out there, and let's get into this video. And first off, I would like to start with a summary of the Fourth Wing book. So in the very beginning of Fourth Wing, we are introduced to our main character, Violet Sorrengail, a girl who struggles with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Even though it is not explicitly stated in the book, Rebecca Yarros has confirmed that that is canon. And coupled with her rare disability, Violet also has silver tips in her hair, like an ombre look, that is also unique to her. No one else in her family has this very definitive feature, only Violet, which is again another sign of her specialness. We are also introduced to what little is left of Violet's family, her sister and her mother. Violet's brother Brennan recently died in battle, and her father died of a broken heart. And Lilith, who is a general at Basgiath War College, decides that Violet should join the Writers' Quadrant. This Writers' College kills more soldiers than it conscripts them, and even though they take this as a note of pride, they also later on complain that they have no soldiers left to fight. This college is so determined to keep up its deadly reputation that it is willing to put its own soldiers at risk in order to maintain its prestige. Personally, I feel like valuing human life and winning a war is more important, but that's just me. So Lilith wants her daughter to become a dragon rider like her and Mira. Mira is understandably upset about this because she knows that Violet is very frail and fragile, and she is worried that her sister will be killed. Mira and Lilith do not have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and they're dragon riders at Basgiath. Lilith has the ability to wield storms, and Mira has the ability to wield ward stones that protect her and the Basgiath War College from its enemies. It's also important to note that Violet's mother has the exact same signet as the Venin Queen in Onyx Storm, which I thought was incredibly convenient. So even though Violet is a scribe, it is very clear that Violet has no choice in the matter. She has to go. And Mira is worried that her reputation as a general's daughter will also put a target on her back, and she could be killed by the rebellion children who are also part of the Writers' Quadrant. So Mira pulls her aside and straps Violet with as many knives as she could possibly carry, also giving her a book written by her now deceased brother Brennan, which also gives Violet a huge advantage over the other potential writers in her quadrant. It is basically like a cheater's guide to how to survive the War College. But Mira also leaves Violet with this final warning to avoid a man by the name of Xaden Ryderson, one of the writers at the Basgiath War College, whose father was killed by General Sorrengail.
Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Mira says that if he found out who Violet was, he would surely kill her. Violet is grateful for the advice, and now armed with both knowledge and weapons, Violet leaves for the conscription day, and the first trial for the new recruits is they have to walk across this parapet, which is essentially a very long, very thin beam that is over 200 feet in the air, and if they slip, they will surely plummet to their deaths. And with a little added challenge, there is also a huge rainstorm, which calls to question if General Sorrengail can wield storms, is she causing this storm? Which is a question that will unfortunately never be answered. And as Violet prepares to walk across this parapet, she notices this girl named Rhiannon, who has very slippery leather shoes. Now Violet decides to give Rhiannon one of her rubber-soled shoes. And once she and Rhiannon exchange shoes, Violet meets another new recruit named Dylan, a man who is very naive and obtusely optimistic when it comes to survival, and he is unfortunately one of the first recruits to die. Poor guy, he was just a jinx. And now it is Violet's turn to cross a parapet, and as she is slowly tight-roping her way across, she notices that there is a new recruit behind her by the name of Jack Barlow, who already has a personal vendetta against Violet and is making it his life mission to catch up to her and to push her off the parapet. And as Jack is slowly inching closer and closer to her, Violet decides in order to calm her nerves, she needs to recite very important historical facts about Navarre in Rebecca Yarros' very clumsy way to introduce exposition to the reader, but it is not very subtle and it feels like you're getting hit in the face with an expositional sledgehammer, which is not something that I as a reader enjoy. The name of the continent that Violet lives on is literally called the Continent, a concept that is both both mind-boggling and very difficult to believe. Especially in a very imperialist country like Navarre, I was very surprised that they didn't just name it the United States of Navarre. It would not surprise me at all if they named the entire continent after their own country. So as Violet is reciting a history lesson to the reader, Jack Barlow finally catches up to her, and this is when Violet gets to the end of the parapet, jumps off, and puts a knife straight up to his balls and threatens to cut them off if Jack dares to take another step forward. To which Jack does concede, but he still threatens Violet's life, even though she just spared his, confirming his place as the one villain of the Fourth Wing series that just cannot quit. A character that we will not be able to escape, a villain that is so useless and so ineffective to the series that even if you would remove him from the story, it would not affect it in the slightest. He is like that one fly at the family picnic that just won't leave you alone. So Violet made it safely across the parapet, but not without injury. When she jumped off the beam to the ground, she did dislocate her knee, and she needed to go get it mended. And Dane, her childhood friend, is there to welcome her into Best Guy at War College and bemoan the fact that she is now in the writer's quadrant and has now put herself in danger. The most interesting part about this scene to me is the fact that even though Mira told Violet that she needs to protect her identity and make sure that no one knows who she is, everyone at this War College already knows who she is. Not only because she's a general's daughter, but because she has been a Best Guy at War College for years. Not to mention her silver hair is her one trademark, and it is very rare, so obviously she would stand out like a sore thumb. Once Violet mends her knee, she's happy to see that Rhiannon made it safely across the parapet thanks to her rubber shoe. So do many more of these freshmen first years, or as I like to call them, fresh meat, who unfortunately are not going to survive much longer. So once Violet and the new survivors gather in an assembly to welcome them into Best Guy at War College, this is where Violet meets her love interest in the form of Xaden Riderson, a character that is described as the level of hot that can get you in trouble. And no matter how hard Rebecca Yarros tries to keep Dane in the loop of the love triangle, it is very clear from the get-go who is quote-unquote endgame for Violet.
My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius.
My name is Jeff.
And it is not her childhood friend Dane, who constantly moans and groans over Violet, acting as more of a mother hen than an actual friend. A do-gooder know-it-all who constantly recites passages from the rulebook, whose entire character is dependent upon following the rules and drinking the Best Guy at War College Kool-Aid. It just feels like a walking propaganda ad. Again, there's not much complexity in Dane. He is essentially Xaden's foil. Xaden being the broody, moody bad boy who rebels against the Best Guy at War College and sees through his propaganda to the very heart of the corruption, whereas Dane is willing to follow the rules without question in order to survive. And Violet's burgeoning attraction towards Xaden is also very indicative of her character arc, outgrowing her own indoctrination, waking up to the fact that the very truth and mantras that she believed as a child are all built on shaky foundations. Conspiracies, lies, and also censorship. A concept that, in the hands of a much better author, could have been a radical take on the indoctrination of our military, but alas, Rebecca Yarros decides it's much more important to focus on the dragons and the smut. Dane asks whether or not Violet should just go back to the scribe quadrant and blatantly disregard her mother's orders. But alas, Violet tells him that she cannot go back because her mother would drag her straight back. Therefore, Violet is essentially trapped there by her mother, and there is no other choice for her other than to survive. And one of the ways that she has to do that is to hide her disability, because Best Guy at War College thrives on this elitist, Darwinistic mentality that only the strong should survive. And therefore, all the weak are weeded out. And Dane agrees to be very discreet about her disability and offers to help her in any way he can, mainly by asking her to be part of his quadrant, specifically called Second Wing. But Xaden Riderson, who for some reason has way more authority over Dane, volunteers to have Violet be part of his quadrant called Fourth Wing. And now Violet feels even more hopeless. Not only is she trapped there by her mother, but now she is under constant watchful eye of the very man who wants to kill her. Or does he? So after Violet is mended and sent on her merry way, everyone soon realizes who Violet is. Gossip at the school spreads like wildfire, and the general is responsible not only for killing Xaden's father, but also for killing the other rebellion children's parents. And let's just say there's plenty of bad blood between the rebellion children and the Sorengales. Many of these rebellion children go out of their way to make Violet's life a living hell. Imogen, who later becomes Violet's friend, does get into a physical altercation with Violet and breaks her bones. Which again brings up this question, why on earth would you enlist the children of your enemies into this war college where, if they survive, can potentially be given unlimited power? A question that is not answered until Iron Flame, the sequel. And if you're curious about why exactly this decision was made by General Sorengale herself, make sure to go check out my video on Iron Flame to learn the truth. Although, minor spoiler alert, the reason is really stupid. But the War College is willing to overlook loyalties in order to beef up their ranks, so to speak. They are still incredibly desperate for soldiers due to low numbers that survive all these different trials. But they need an army to fight their enemy, the Eurasians, who also have an elite army of their own, the Griffin Flyers. Why is Navarre fighting the Eurasian people? We don't know. know, and quite honestly, I don't think Rebecca Yarros does either. As someone who has read the entire series so far, I have not found a single reason as to why these people are fighting. If you or someone you know actually know the reason why the Navarrians and Oricians are fighting, please tell me down in the comments. I am so confused, but I guess a murderous war college would be obsolete if there wasn't a war to fight. Perhaps they just created conflict for conflict's sake in order to keep their jobs and to stay relevant in Navarre, which is not something I would put past these people. I would not be surprised if people like General Athos were willing to create war for war's sake in order to validate their existence in the Navarrian government. So now Violet is assigned into her wing, and this is where it's starting to get little hints of Harry Potter because Violet and her friends are going to these classes and learning history of Navarre, physics, really useful stuff for when you're up in the air flying on your dragon. Personally for me, I feel like a much better use of their time would be to practice mounting dragons and to also teach them how to mentally shield themselves, because that is a big conflict that Violet has later on. What's the point of going to history if you don't know how to fly a dragon? That makes absolutely no sense to me. So Xaden is Violet's new squad leader, and he is also there to help them train in hand-to-hand combat. Why on earth would you need to know hand-to-hand combat if you're flying 80 miles per hour in the air on a dragon that can spit fire? In what situation would you be close enough to a griffin flyer to be able to throw a punch in the first place? I have no idea. But no matter what, Rebecca Yarros still manages to have at least one hand-to-hand combat scenes in each of her books, so I guess it's relevant to some extent, and was way too reminiscent of Divergent. It feels like a huge waste of time and government resources. And of course, because Violet has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, she is not a very capable fighter, so she has to find other ways in order to defeat her enemy. Violet has absolutely no combat skills. Why would you want to enlist soldiers in your elite army if they do not know how to fight? It makes absolutely no sense. It would have made more sense if she started in the infantry and then she would work her way up to the very top, where she doesn't really need to be as physical anymore, but she does need to have the mental strength that goes into being a dragon rider. Personally, I feel like it would have been much more impactful if Violet was a scribe throughout the entire book and accidentally bonded to Terran and Andarna, especially after saving Andarna's life, but I did not write this book, Rebecca Yarros did. Not only does Violet have the advantage of being a Nepo baby, but she also can sneak into her mother's office, find out who she's fighting, and then poison them. I'm super surprised actually that Violet's signet power had nothing to do with poison. She's like the poison queen, the poison savant, the one who knows everyone's weaknesses and can target them directly. So I feel like personally that would have been a much more fitting power for her to have. But alas, logic goes right out the window in the world of Fourth Wing. Why be logical at all when you could just be slightly entertaining? And the worst part of this entire classes montage is that Rebecca Yarros doesn't use these classes to actually teach the reader anything. This would be the point where it'd be very significant to actually learn about history in history class, because we as the readers, we learn information in more natural ways, right? We watch the news. That's how we know what's going on in the world, current events and whatnot. We read the newspaper. We learn about significant events in class. If you were able to teach your characters the same way that we as the readers are taught information in our world, it would make it way more relatable, and it would actually be way more helpful for the reader. Not to mention the fact that these classes are taught by a writer and a scribe. I don't know why Rebecca Yarros couldn't just have Violet be a scribe teacher teaching alongside Xaden, because that would have been a very interesting conflict as well. So like I mentioned before, Violet and her friends are forced to essentially train in hand-to-hand combat, and at no point during the weeks and weeks of constant training does anyone ever put two and two together that Violet is the one poisoning these people. This is a war college built of the best and brightest in all of Navarre, and you're telling me that the best and brightest cannot realize, using context clues and basic logical thinking steps, that Violet is the one who is poisoning her opponents before they even get on the mat. Explain that to me. It makes absolutely no sense that no one figured this out. And the only person who does figure it out eventually is Xaden, because one day Violet is actually climbing a tree and she overhears a group of rebellion children conspiring against the Besgaith War College. And Violet, who sees this happening, realizes that they're committing treason, but she strikes up a deal with Xaden, who sensed that she was there because his shadows apparently allow him to sense when other people are nearby. Truth be told, I actually do not know the extent of Xaden's shadow magic. It seems to be very random at times, but that's a conversation for another day. So Xaden senses that she's nearby, and when all of his little rebellion friends disperse, he looks up in the tree and he says, "I see you there, Violence," because he calls her Violence as a nickname. So he knows that she's there, and she climbs back down the tree, and she says that she will not reveal to anyone that she knows that they were meeting, because according to Besgaith War College, the rebellion children are not allowed to meet in groups bigger than two. And this is is mostly due to the fact that they don't want them to form a coup, even though they are doing it right under their noses. This is mainly because one of the generals, named General Melgren, can actually see the future outcome of a battle, but whenever the rebellion children are together in groups bigger than 2, he cannot see the outcome of the battle. It's this arbitrary little stipulation that Rebecca Yarros throws in as the proverbial wrench into her world building, because it does not make any sense why these rebellion children would be such an obvious form of kryptonite for this general, and also stands the question, why wouldn't they use this very particular weakness against him? Again, I have so many questions, and we're not even halfway through the summary yet. So Imogen starts to come around and realize that Violet isn't actually a bad person, and she agrees to help Violet train. So they work out together to help Violet become a more capable soldier, and to also prepare for her fight with Jack. And can you guess how she won that battle? Yes, you're right, she poisons him yet again. She finds out that Jack is actually severely allergic to orange, and during the battle she essentially sprays him with this orange concoction. He has an allergic reaction, and he bows out of the fight. So again, Violet is extremely creative in the manner of which that she chooses to fight. And as Violet continues to train and become a better, stronger soldier, she realizes that she's starting to catch feelings towards Xaden. And she's starting to see Dane as more of this brotherly nuisance. And after Violet and Dane kiss, Violet soon realizes that her childhood friend is going to forever be her childhood friend, that the attraction is not there. However, in contrast, the sexual tension between Xaden is so palpable you could cut it with a knife. So now that the new recruits have passed the physical combat challenge of the Best Guy with War College, they're now moving on to the real recruitment stage, in which the dragons choose who to bond with. So as the dragons are choosing their human riders, Violet overhears Jack Barlow and some of his friends say they're gonna go kill a weak dragon who turns out to be a baby feather-tailed dragon named Andarna. And Violet, because she's the main character and she's supposed to be noble, integrous, and kind, she decides to stop them, even though she knows that she is weaker and she will potentially die. She actually puts up a pretty decent fight until Terran swoops in to save her. Now Terran is one of the rarest, most powerful dragons in all of Navarre, and he decides to bond with Violet because of her bravery and the fact that she stood up for Andarna. And because Violet has to be the special girl that ever specialed, she also gets bonded with Andarna. So now Violet is bonded to these 2 dragons, and it becomes an interesting conflict between the humans and the Imperium. So the Imperium is the Council of Elderly Dragons. We never really get to see them, but we do hear a lot about them throughout the entire series. And the Human Council, or the magistrates if you will, don't know if it's legal or a good idea for Violet to be bonded to 2 dragons, and they actually consider asking her to sever the ties with one of the dragons, which is a painful experience for the dragons. And dragons don't follow the rules of humans, so the fact that they would even consider listening to the humans at all is a bit of a surprise to me. This entire verbal exchange, it doesn't really make any sense because all their points are moot. Dragons can do whatever the hell they want. They do not need to follow the rules of mankind, so the fact that the humans would even think that they would listen to them or even consider their opinions at all is quite laughable at this point. I just wanted Terran just to give them the dragon equivalent of the middle finger and tell them, screw you guys, we're going to do what we want because we're dragons and we're more powerful than you, and we're not going to risk our mental health because you guys are jealous of Violet. So Violet, who is the poster child of main character syndrome, gets to keep her 2 special dragons, and now on top of that she is also bonded to the guy that she's been harboring a secret crush for weeks, Xaden Riderson. And Terran has a mate named Sigale, and Sigale is bonded to Xaden, meaning that they're now in this 5-way mental telepathic group chat in their minds that they can't really escape, which in my personal opinion sounds like a nightmare. And it also incorporates the forced proximity trope, which is usually my least favorite proximity trope, but this was a very interesting subversion of that trope because now they aren't trapped physically together, now they are also mentally trapped together. And the unfortunate side effect of this mental group chat is that Violet can empathically feel them getting down and getting dirty.
We're watching animal porn!
And Violet is now super horned up and she's walking around the castle trying to figure out how to block these dragons out. And she of course runs into Xaden, who is, I guess, smoking this book's weed equivalent to calm himself down, and it's at this point that they have a very special kiss, a kiss that is so much better than the kiss that she had with Dane, and Violet knows for sure that she is falling hard for this boy, and Xaden is understandably very reticent to get involved with Violet, not just because of who her mother is, but also because he's just not the kind of guy that falls in love. he's a bad boy. He's got to maintain his bad boy persona, but he cannot quell his undeniable attraction towards Violet, and pretty soon they start to become as intimate as their dragons are. Xaden and Violet are now lovers in the nighttime. Xaden says, "Do not fall in love with me, Violet. That's just not who I am." And Violet is over here thinking, "I'll wear him down eventually." These are the thoughts of the people that we're supposed to be rooting for. A man who is terrified of commitment, and a woman who is willing to emotionally manipulate him, weaponizing her sex appeal in order to get what she wants. Couple of the year. He does love her too, but he just can't really admit it to himself because he cannot be caught dead throwing the L word around willy-nilly. This part to me was very cringy, and I was actually embarrassed on Violet's behalf. "Babe, you're currently riding the Endorphins Express. Maybe you should wait until you get off at the next station to be throwing big words like love around." It's safe to say I do not like these people very much, especially when their sexcapades involve breaking furniture and causing fires through Violet's power, which is done lightning. Yep, you got that right. Her power is lightning, and Xaden's power is shadows. They're essentially polar opposites, but of course opposites attract, which is another romance trope thrown in amongst a million of other tropes that just litter this entire book. Which does beg the question, if these two were not bonded together through their dragons, would they have ever gotten together? Who knows? Again, that is the beauty of the forced proximity trope. It doesn't have to be natural, it just has to happen suddenly, and sometimes without their consent, which is not fun to read, I will say. So instead of learning how to mentally shield her dragons out whenever they're having sex, Violet uses this as an excuse to get it on with Xaden. And the smut scenes are just as bad as you would expect them to be. Reads with Rachel actually did a very interesting video on this very subject on her channel, which I would definitely recommend you go check out. And it is a video in which she discusses beat by beat the 8, I believe, or so sex scenes, and these scenes are all the same. Xaden is always the one who instigates first, and it always ends with them causing a forest fire. And given the fact that their powers are very distinctive to who they are, it's also a huge surprise that no one realizes until Onyx Storm that Violet and Xaden are the ones responsible for all these random fires and lightning strikes that pop up around the castle. Because if she dies, Xaden dies. Xaden is trying to put in an effort to try to put up extra safety precautions for Violet. For example, he has Liam follow her around as her own personal bodyguard without her consent, which we'll talk about later. And they also create a saddle for Violet. Mira creates a shield out of dragon scales. Why they do not take this very accessible technology and give it to other riders, when you consider the fact that these dragons are literally flying at 80 miles an hour and the scales are slick. You're hanging on for dear life, potentially going through rainstorms. You're telling me that all these riders can hang on all the time without any extra assistance? Asgard War College has no value for human or dragon life. So after Violet is given these tools to help her stay on her dragon, she's not falling off Terran as much, she's able to stay on her seat. She manifests her lightning powers, which are very difficult to control. And then they're getting to the final days of their training, and they start to prepare for the war games, where the riders and their dragons are put in a warlike scenario, and they have to fight their way out, not only to survive, to also prove themselves to the higher-ups at Basgiath. Now, it's during the war games that Jack actually does try to attack Violet. Again, how is this man able to get away with literal murder all the time is beyond me. He's trying to attack Violet, who wields her lightning abilities, creates a rock slide that buries Jack. Violet is understandably very conflicted about this because on the one hand, she just killed a man, even though he was the worst character in the whole book, but she is very upset that she has actually killed someone. Up until that point, Violet has basically gotten away using her wits, her poison, and the book that Brennan gave her in order to survive. She never had to actually kill anyone, and now that she has, she is very remorseful of it. "Babe, this was a belligerent murderer. If it was not you who's going to kill him, it was going to be someone else." But there truly is no rest for the wicked because the year is finally drawing to a close. Violet and her friends are given a final challenge, and General Atos sends Violet and her friends out to the front lines in the hopes that they are killed. And there they run into the Venin, creatures that Violet believed were only part of fairy tales that her father used to read to her when she was a child. But it turns out they are actually real. And this is when Andarna is forced to manifest her time-stopping ability in order to save Violet's life, and an ability that she grows out of once she grows up. Like J.K. Rowling, Rebecca Yarros knocks time travel off the shelf and only uses it when it's convenient, and then quickly bans it when it's no longer sufficient for the narrative. And because Andarna uses her time-stopping ability, she cripples herself beyond repair, but despite the sacrifice, Violet is still poisoned, and it's very clear that she is about to die, which is just a picture of irony considering the fact that Violet has used poison so many times on other people that it's now finally coming back to bite her in the ass. So Xaden makes the ultimate decision to take Violet to Arisha, where he knows that she can be mended. And who just happens to be there but her brother, Brennan. And the biggest plot twist of all is that Taryn knew that her brother was alive this entire time because his previous rider was the one who saved Brennan's life. wife, and he just decided not to tell her. And then it is at this point that Brennan and Xaden both reveal to Violet that they are part of the Resistance and the Venin are the real villains of the story. And that's it. That's the end. Alright everyone, that was the summary for Fourth Wing. Now let's get into the review portion of this video where I talk about things that I actually liked about Fourth Wing, and believe it or not, there were quite a few things. First and foremost, I would like to say that this plot was way more conducive than the plots of Iron Flame and Onyx Storm. This book had a much more definitive chronological order, everything made sense from beginning to end. It had a much more simplistic style, it was very easy to follow, and I understand why some people call this an accessible read, because Rebecca Yarros writes in a very easy to understand fashion, not only in her reductive prose, but also in the dialogue that is very reminiscent of modern colloquialisms and words and phrases that we use today, / 10 years ago, or what I like to call in the social media age. Rebecca Yarros does rely very heavily on the tell versus show aspect of storytelling, not exactly leaving a lot up to the reader's imagination, but with this book I feel like there's a lot more mystery, a lot more novelty, because this is the first book of the series. Everything about this book is brand new, and I think that's what's so enticing about it, because the entire time you're reading this book, you're trying to find things out about the War College, about who Xaden is, about who Dane is, about who Violet is, and I think the novelty really does add to the overall intrigue of Fourth Wing. I think this really does come to the book's advantage as opposed to Iron Flame and Onyx Storm. We already know who these characters are, there's not really a whole lot of mystery left in the world, and anything mysterious at all is due to the lack of world building and consistency in the lore. I feel like a lot of people liked Fourth Wing because it felt so fresh and so new, and it combined a lot of really popular tropes of the genre like enemies to lovers, forced proximity trope, opposites attract, and Fourth Wing shows a lot of promise. Everything is so brand new that the reader only focuses on immersing themselves in the world and getting to know these characters that we will be following for the duration of the series. And of course, the best part of this book are the dragons themselves. They are the only thing that I personally look forward to whenever I read this series. I love Indarna, I love Terran, I love their dynamic as like this father-daughter duo, in which Terran, who is essentially the dragon version of Xaden, is very curmudgeon-y. He's very stubborn, very prideful, and very gruff, as opposed to Indarna, who's the exact opposite. She's a sweetheart, she's a softie, she is very kind, compassionate, and she is much more of a pacifist than many of the other dragons. And her pacifist perspective on life is very refreshing, and my interest in Fourth Wing exponentially increased whenever the dragons were on the page. And honestly, the more dragons the better. I care about the stuff way more than I care about the romance. Personally, I feel like the Empyrean and the dragons should be ruling the world because they're the most interesting and complex characters of the entire story. Everyone else in the book feels very one note. They have one definitive defining personality trait, like Riddick, who is a funny man who I hate, and Xaden is just our moody broody boy, Rhiannon is nice, Lilith is stubborn, Mira is protective, Dane is a whiny helicopter parent, and Atos is just angry and vindictive at all times. All these characters are very two-dimensional, and the dragons are the only ones that seem to have multiple personality traits and more complex motivations than the humans do. My favorite parts of the book were when Violet and the dragons were flying in the sky. I definitely want more moments like that where we get to breathe and it doesn't feel like a complete waste of time to the reader. And at least in this book, Rebecca Yarros doesn't completely abandon Violet's disability or throw it out the window when it's no longer convenient to the plot. It does get a little bit questionable, the representation during the smut scenes, but outside of that, you can really see how Violet is negatively impacted by her disability and how she tries to work her way around it in the cleverest ways possible. So I will give Rebecca Yarros props for that. There also is a lot of diversity and representation in the book. Jacinia, who is one of Violet's old scribe friends, is deaf. Both men and women in this world actually take birth control, which I found to be very interesting. Rhiannon, who is Violet's BFF, is a black woman who also dates women at the War College. I'm not exactly sure if she's bisexual or not, or if she only dates women. I do also like the sex positivity in the books. Even though I do not like reading the smut scenes, I'm a very sex positive person. I'm not a prude in the slightest. I just don't like reading these scenes because, first of all, they're all the same. They're always written so awkwardly. The euphemisms are laughable at best. Although I do enjoy the fact that Rebecca Yarros does include the word clit in her books. I think that's very nice to use that technical term. I just personally don't enjoy them, but I do like the philosophy around sex at the War College that's very much accepted as this stress release for the dragon riders, because again, you're in these high stress situations, you need to find a way to let that stress out in more ways than one. I do like the leniency when it comes to casual sex and the fact that both men and women are held accountable for decisions that they make at the War College, and I do also like the lack of judgment and stigma around the topic of sex and intimacy. A certain level of equality that does exist in Basgiath War College in which men and women are seen as equals. They're willing to overlook these extracurricular activities and also turn a blind eye to all the murder. I guess it's just a philosophy. Have sex and kill a lot of people. Even though stealing is bad for some reason. Not sure exactly why that is. So again, I liked how Violet's disability was represented in this book. However, I feel like that didn't really continue throughout the rest of the books, much to my chagrin. But yeah, believe it or not, there are a lot of positive things that happen in these books. Now, unfortunately, we are moving on to the parts of the book that I just could not get behind, the parts that I hated with a fiery burning passion of 1,000 suns. And to start off that list, I would like to talk first and foremost about my biggest gripe with the series, and that is Violet herself. Violet has always and will forever be my greatest issue with the Fourth Wing books. She is plot armor personified, she is main character syndrome, and it's due mostly to the fact that she is Rebecca Yarrow's insert. A self-insert is when an author basically puts an idealized version of themselves into a story, and it allows them to overlook a lot of the character flaws, because like in real life, it's hard for us to really see our own flaws unless someone points them out to us, and Rebecca Yarros tries so hard to make Violet a very likable character, but she fails on several accounts. Violet is probably one of the most unremarkable protagonists I've ever had the misfortune of reading. She is very vanilla. She's like this book's version of Bella, a bit of a blank slate.
If she was a spice, she'd be flour. If she were a book, she'd be 2 books.
So many people are holding her hand through this entire experience. It doesn't really feel like Violet is an active character in her own story. She uses her wit and wiles to sneak into her mother's office, using her privilege as a general's daughter to access information that the other cadets do not have. And that is something that she also uses in one of the war games. Like, they literally sneak into her mother's office and get intel on battle briefs, and they win the competition because of her direct access to her mother. How is that fair to the other cadets? And she also gets a lot of help from her siblings. There are so many people on Team Violet that are helping her go through this experience at Beskaya that it robs her of any autonomy and any individuality. Consider this, for example. None of the decisions that are made in the book are really Violet's decisions. She doesn't make the decision to go to Beskaya War College, her mother does. She doesn't decide who she bonds with, the dragons do. She doesn't decide to go to the front lines during the war games, General Atos tells her to go. She doesn't really have a lot of say in her relationship with Xaden. They're forced together due to this telepathic forced proximity trope of the story. You see what I mean there? There's so many times where Violet is being forced into this corner, and she doesn't really get to make any of those decisions. Even Xaden makes decisions on her behalf. He enlists Liam as her personal bodyguard to follow her around so that way she won't get killed. Even though it almost happens when she's asleep, and one of the characters, Amber, tries to enlist help of the other first years to try to kill her, and then the decision is made not by Violet but by other people at the War College what will happen to Amber. And Dane even swoops in and he takes her memories from her, which is another point of contention later on in the story. Is when they're about to go to the war games, he touches Violet, he takes her memories without her consent, and he's able to go back and tattletale on her. It's really hard to root for a character when you realize that they're not really the ones calling the shots. They aren't making decisions that affect the story. Other characters are making those decisions for them. And another example I just thought of was the fact that she was taken to the Resistance while she was unconscious. She literally had no choice in the matter, and information is withheld from her all the time. We are told that Violet is one of the smartest people in the entire college, but we never actually get to see that because she never really makes any good decisions, because all of these decisions are made for her. All of her ideas are extremely half-baked, and that's because her entire life other people have been making decisions for her. She is not allowed to act on her own volition. She's at the mercy of other characters. And yes, you could argue that Violet did choose to save Andarna. That's the only one redeeming quality that she has. She gets upset when people try to help her because they view her as weak. But as Violet, you need this help. Take the handout. These people are trying to help you. She gets very up in arms whenever people see her as weak. And it goes back to this very ableist point of view that the story has surrounding Violet's disability, where it's a hindrance, that's for sure, but she has to push through her disability with her workouts with Imogen, with her sexcapades with Xaden, and all these other instances where she tries to pretend like she's just like everyone else, when in reality she's not. I definitely wish that mentality surrounding Violet's disability was a little bit better and handled a lot more gently than it was. Rebecca Yarros never really shows us who Violet is, she tells us. We as a reader never really have to think for ourselves. That level of storytelling in a book like this really does retract from it in a way that I personally think does more harm than good in the Fourth Wing series. Another point of contingency that I have about Violet is the topic of Brennan, her brother. So Brennan is literally resurrected from the dead. He's been alive this whole time. He should have a much bigger role in the series, but outside of being a literal plot device, he has has no real role outside of just being Violet's brother, who she thought was dead, and is now actually alive. Yay! And that's it. She never really is curious about her brother. He just tells her his story unprompted, and she goes back to crying over Xaden. This character is literally used for shock value, and that's it. That's his entire purpose in the story. I just don't care about his character because Rebecca Yarros doesn't, so why should I? Leading into that point, none of the characters in this series really have any depth at all. Like I mentioned before, all of them are very one-note. They all basically have one defining personality trait, and the story tries so hard to convince us that these guys are the good guys, but they don't have any human-like qualities that make me want to root for them. Whenever someone at the college dies, they're completely remorseless, except for Violet when she killed Jack. When cadets die right in front of them, they just move past it like nothing happened. They're completely unaffected by it. And then it makes me not care about those characters because I'm like, the other characters don't care when they die. Why should I care if they die? Which makes it really hard for me to root for anyone aside the dragons. If the dragons are the only characters that we care about, why not just make a story all about the dragons? Violet is the only one who has any point of misguided remorse when she killed Jack, and that was actually really interesting exploration of her character because of the complexity of those feelings. Jack was a terrible character, but he was still a person. That was an interesting character arc, but she got distracted by Xaden and they just completely forgot about it until Iron Flame, and we all know what happened then. And again, I just don't like it when characters are so apathetic towards other characters in the story because it seems really inhumane to me. On the subject of Hunger Games, even Stone Cold Katniss still wept profusely when Rue died, and that was a point where I really started to root more for Katniss because this is someone who has compassion. She sees all these people as people, not as weapons for the Capitol, and I thought that was a really good moment for her and a really big shift in how I felt towards Katniss. But then in this book, we don't really have that at all. We have compassion for a guy who really should have been killed a long time ago, who should not have been allowed in the college, who's a liability to the wing, and everyone just let him get away with murder. Also, I do not appreciate it when their solution to everything is just to beat each other to a pulp by taking their problems to the mat. That's not how you form camaraderie among soldiers. The whole point of having a quadrant is for people to work together as a team, right? But if you constantly beat up your teammates or threaten to kill them, there is no brotherhood, sisterhood here. So what's to stop your own soldiers from killing each other instead of killing the enemy? This is not a good way to train your soldiers to actually fight together in a war. And outside of Violet and her Scooby gang of friends, she's the only one who actually has a strong connection to people there. No one's going to go full Hacksaw Ridge for anyone who threatens to kill them. Moving on, this book is written in a juvenile way that's meant to be accessible, but really just comes across as a millennial woman throwing in random colloquialisms that really date this book, despite the fact that we don't actually know when it exactly takes place. This book obviously takes place in medieval ages when people only use swords and crossbows as weapons, but then it's confusing because then you also get more modern technology like rubber, the printing press, and personally I feel like the series would really benefited if it was an urban fantasy, which would explain the very modern dialogue and the technology that is just brought up randomly. The dialogue is even inconsistent because they mention something like fertility suppressant instead of birth control. Then they also say things like playground equipment. Where's a playground? They use our months, and again, our months are based off the Roman gods who they do not worship. They worship Dune or Malak. They use words like certified badass, certified freak, centrifuge, which again, how do you have a centrifuge? It makes absolutely no sense. Off like a shot, which again is a statement that is related to guns. And if you don't have guns, how do you know what a shot is? It's very inconsistent because Rebecca Yarros put way more of her time and effort and energy into building up the romance part of the romantasy genre instead of the fantasy part, which again I think really hurts her story. Bit of a controversial take. I don't think that Violet and Xaden, their relationship was really enemies to lovers. He may have complex feelings about her because of who her mother is, but in the very beginning of the book, it is very clear the way that Rebecca Yarros describes Xaden that they are endgame because he's super hot, he's moody broody boy, and he has onyx eyes, which are described in great length throughout the rest of the series. He pushes Violet to be the best version of herself, and he doesn't let her disability be a hindrance to her. He doesn't treat her like a baby like Dane does, and it's more like an insta-love connection because they are both very obviously attracted to each other. The whole enemies to lovers thing, it's so fake, and it's even revealed to be fake in Iron Flame. I guess Rebecca Yarros just lied the whole time. Xaden was never going to kill Violet. She was never in any danger from him. He was going to protect her no matter what, especially since they're now mated with dragons. If she dies, he dies, vice versa. But then Violet still continues to think that Xaden's trying to kill her. Why would he do that and risk his own life? Again, she's supposed to be the smartest person in this book, and she has very glaring holes in logic, and it makes no sense. Like, how did you not figure that out, babe? Put 2 and 2 together. It's very simple. If Taryn can do high school level physics in your mind,
A squared plus B squared equals C squared.
you can put 2 and 2 together, logically figure out context clues, and solve the mystery. Everything has to be handed to her like to us. The tension is so manufactured between them because everyone else is telling her to not like him, and she never really gets to make that decision for herself because Violet has no autonomy, and this is a book all about her. Technically, it's her journals translated by Jacinia, who also feels the need to keep the sex scenes in there too for some reason. Babe, read The Room. No one wants to read that stuff. And I've mentioned this next critique before, where the lore of the book is very half-baked. Nothing in this book really sticks. None of the lore is very consistent because, again, Rebecca Yarros made this stuff up as she went along. She's much more of a pantser author rather than a plotter, which kind of reminds me of that one Michael Scott quote from The Office.
Sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way.
And one of the main, again, nitpicky things that I've noticed is their lanterns are called mage lights, but mage is never properly defined in the world of Fourth Wing. Yes, most of us can probably guess on our own that a mage means a magical person, but is there just someone who's always keeping the lights on? At Navarre, where do these mage lights come from? And then later on in Iron Flame, Rebecca Yarros tells us that it's residual magic that exists at the War College, but how does it exist on the other side of the parapet in the town? Where and why and how? It does not make any sense, you guys. The gods of the world are basically useless, and we don't really get to explore them until book 3. We get to explore more about Dune, about Malik, about the god of luck, about the god that the continent is technically named after, but they all collectively got amnesia, so they forgot what their continent was called. It was very strange. In this book, it says you can never sever ties with dragons, but in Onyx Storm, and Darna severs her tie with Violet to go with her family, to learn the ways of the feathertail, golden scale people, whatever her dragon species is called. So the runes are briefly mentioned / introduced in this book, and those are like very powerful tools, and that's not really explored further until Iron Flame, which again is not necessarily a bad thing, but the way that Rebecca Yarros writes, it's very clear that she had no idea how she was going to utilize this information, and then the minute she got critiqued on it, she decided, okay, now I'm going to make it much more important. Also, the dragons in this universe allow their rider to manifest when they are deemed ready, but some dragons are revealed to not allow their riders to manifest their powers, and then the riders go mad and then they die. Like, why would you not let your rider get access to their powers? Because then they die and then you're affected by that. Again, it makes no sense. The minute you think about this lore for 5 minutes, it all becomes moot or just completely illogical. And then Rebecca Yarros retcons it in her next book and then it becomes irrelevant. Also, there's this rule up at Scythe War College where if anyone manifests an intrinsic power like a mind reader, they're instantly killed. But Dane is an intrinsic by proxy because when he touches you, he gets your memories. Why does he get to live? And also, when you bond with your dragon, you can read each other's minds. Is that not intrinsic? Like, why is it only when a person can read the minds of people around them that's dangerous? But when dragons and writers can coalesce and have a private conversation in their head without anyone else's knowledge, how is that not bad? There's a lot of loopholes in this world building because it's not convenient to the plot, so therefore Rebecca Yarros has to retcon her own rules in order to service her narrative, and her books suffer because of that. Also, Imogen can make people forget memories, so she's basically the inverse of Dane, and that's never questioned, and then Xaden is later revealed to be a different form of intrinsic, but they never threaten to kill him or imprison him or anything, and it's just very strange. The rules of this college, they don't really make any sense to me. Like, why wouldn't you use a mind reader to help you figure out your enemy's secrets? That's an incredibly useful skill to have, and they just snap their necks. Whatever, I don't care. In this world, stealing is bad, but murdering your fellow cadets and harming dragons and experimenting on dragons and killing baby dragons is tolerated. Why would you kill potential riders who could bond to dragons and strengthen your army? Is that not important? And the funniest part of this college is they pride themselves on killing their own cadets and then turn around the next moment and complain that there's no one left to fight their war. And this is why the entire concept of the murder college is completely gratuitously illogical, because it goes against this entire ideology behind war, like strength in numbers, right? Yes, a smaller army could potentially defeat a bigger army, but the problem is that these Navarians intentionally set themselves up for failure and then are surprised when things don't work out for them. them. How are dragons losing to griffins? In their defense, griffins are very big birds and they are half lion, but still, that's no excuse. And also, why is it only the Nepo babies that are allowed such leniency at the college? You cannot kill while asleep, even though that's probably the easiest way to kill someone, just saying. Rebellion kids cannot meet in groups of 2, but they still do anyway, and they literally form an entire coup where they're selling weapons to the enemy under these people's noses, and they don't figure it out. Best and brightest. Also, why would you have the rebellion children take leadership positions in your army? That does not make any sense. And then they're surprised when they rise up against them. How are you this stupid? Like, all these people should be dead by now. It's crazy. And also, speaking of withholding information, the dragons know that the venom exists, but they're withholding that very important information from their riders, information that could get them killed. And for what? Why are they allowing other riders and dragons to keep this ginormous secret from everyone, knowing that it could potentially kill riders and other dragons? It's like Rebecca Yarros is withholding this for shock value, and shock value is not an adequate way to write stories, because the minute you sit down and think about the implications of the dragons withholding information like this from the humans, it starts to create all these other issues. And another crucial point I want to make against the dragons is that the dragons know that the Venin are trying to take energy from the Veil, because that's revealed in Iron Flame, that the Venin are trying to wield energy from the earth, and the most powerful place is where the dragon hatchings happen. So they're intentionally targeting baby dragons, and the dragons, instead of telling the humans, hey, we need to stop these people, they're like, let's just keep this on the down low, on the DL. No one needs to know. Why would you not do everything in your power to stop them, or sit the human council down and be like, hey, we know you're keeping this a secret, you need to stop, they're going to kill everyone unless you do something. We need to end this war with the Oretians and stop the Venin. Why is that not happening? Why are they not doing this? Because again, dragons are not defined by human rules. They can defy human rules because the Imperium is supposedly superior, and yet they still follow human rules. The dragons have absolutely nothing to gain from keeping the Venin a secret, and have nothing to gain from bonding with people like Jack, who is a liability to the wing. He is really killing potential riders that could be very volatile to the war. Why would they let him live, let him continue to murder people unencumbered by any punishment or rules, not held accountable, not imprisoned, not kicked out of the war college? It would make way more sense to me if they tried to kill Jack over Violet. Yes, Violet is not the strongest person, but she's not actively trying to kill people. She's less of a liability than Jack is, and no one's threatening his life at all. It also makes no sense that the war college knows absolutely nothing about Venin or baby dragons, and yet they're supposed to have this bond with dragons for hundreds of years. How do they know so little about dragonkind? It would make way more sense if Ceres was written right in the very beginning, when humans just first realized that they could bond to dragons and that the Venin are actually a threat. That would make way more sense if this was taking place in the very beginning of the dragon and human bonds, and that explains why they don't know anything. But no, they're just clueless and making terrible decisions that ultimately harm them in the end, and we're supposed to be rooting for these people. Also, another one of my biggest critiques of the books overall is that it's all work and no play. There really is no levity in these books at the war college, because even in real life, the military, they do fun things to keep the morale up. They go out in the town, they have a ball, but do they do this in Fourth Wing? Nope. No, they don't.
We don't have balls. I honestly have no response to that.
Outside of sex, there really are no high points. It's all just low, beating people up, trying to kill baby dragons. There really is not a lot of fun moments for the reader to latch onto. Once they're at the war college, it's all downhill from there. And another thing I do have to critique is they really pride themselves on hyper-masculine traits, like anger, violence. They discourage any feelings of remorse or guilt. They are encouraged to show their masculinity and strength through physical displays of combat, right? Like hand-to-hand combat, for example. And they're not really allowed to exercise any other emotions outside of apathy or pride or anger. And any violent acts against each other are encouraged and or dismissed entirely. It's very individualistic and very ostracizing because it doesn't really inspire camaraderie amongst the troops. And I feel like that's a really poor philosophy to have at a war college. There are some exceptions to the rule, like when it comes to Jack and Liam, because Liam is Violet's friend and he does die in the war games. But even then, they don't really mourn mourn, and when Violet's mother dies in Iron Flame, she barely spends any time mourning, and then when she's mourning the loss of Andarna, other people barge into her room and tell her, you can't be depressed, you can't mourn, there's a war to fight, suck it up, repress your feelings, swallow it up, and just move on.
So you don't feel.
Rebecca Yarros is trying so hard to write on the coattails of other popular series like Red Queen and Hunger Games and Divergent. It's very obvious that she is pulling a lot of ideas from these series, but at the same time, she doesn't really capture to the full extent what made these other series, primarily Hunger Games, very not only memorable and iconic, but timeless. In the Hunger Games, we are not only rooting for the main characters, but we're also sympathizing with the bad tributes, because we realize that these characters are also victims of the Capitol, of Panem, of the Hunger Games themselves, and even the pick-me ones like the careers, they are indoctrinated with this very radicalized view of the Capitol, and if they follow the rules, oh, they'll be picked, right? They'll survive. But then they still become puppets of the Capitol, and that level of nuance and complexity when it comes to the character work is not evident here. I don't feel anything when Jack dies. I was very happy when Jack died, but in the Hunger Games, when Cato dies, you still feel for Cato because he gets to a point where he's now disillusioned to the Hunger Games, where he realizes that he's a pawn in their game, and you can see that reality check just broke him entirely, and he realizes, oh, I'm dead anyway, and all of this was for nothing, and it's truly a heartbreaking moment for that character. And in this book, I don't feel anything for any of these characters. Outside of Rhiannon and Jacinia, who are my two favorite characters, outside of Taryn and Andarna, I don't really care about anyone in this series. Violet and Xaden can die and I would feel absolutely nothing, and outside of just blatant relief. And that's not something you should feel when it comes to the main characters, I will say. Another critique I have is this is the worst love triangle I've ever seen, because it's so obvious from the get-go who is going to win Violet's heart, and it's not the super protective helicopter parent that is Dane, it's the bad boy, Xaden. There really is no competition, there's no level of suspense, there was no real tension between these two men. They got together way too soon. There was no way that anyone could really become Team Dale or Team Xaden. That was a bit of a lost cause for me. And that concludes my main critiques for the video, and now I want to move into a new section that I like to call food for thought, or questions that I have that haven't been sufficiently answered by the series or by Yarros herself. If you happen to know any of the answers to these questions, feel free to let me know down in the comments, so that way you guys can let me know if there's anything that I missed, and let me know what you think. Do you agree or disagree with my critiques of the series? I know this is a very polarizing book for a lot of people. I love to hear other people's opinions. I do my best to respond to everyone. It might take a day or two, but I really love talking to you guys about books. This is my favorite part of making these vlogs, is just creating a community around books, good or bad. Alright, moving on to food for thought. First question. Her mother is a storm wielder, which is revealed in the very beginning, and there was a storm during Violet's crossing across the parapet. So was her mother trying to kill her? And also, a side tangent, Violet's mother and the Venom Sage have the same signet superpower, so are they related at all? Is the Venom Sage some weird reincarnated version of her mother or something along those lines? Like, I just found that to be very coincidental, and I don't know if Rebecca Yarros did that on purpose, or she just really liked the superpower and she felt like she didn't really get to use it with General Sorrengail, so she just copied and pasted it and recycled it for this new character. I don't know, I thought that was very interesting. And then next question, why aren't dragons in charge? Just saying, they are the superior beings. I don't know why they're not in charge of the humans. Why does Basgiath War College know absolutely nothing about the war? They don't even seem to know why they're fighting the Oretians or the Griffin Flyers. They don't know anything about the Venom, supposedly, / they do, but they're withholding information. They just seem to be very closed-minded and not very curious about the world around them to even question, why are we fighting? Who are the Venom? What is the deal with the Griffin Flyers? There's so many questions unanswered about the war, and why do they enlist their best and brightest only to let them die? Isn't that a huge waste of resources and taxpayer money? I would think so. So why is there any loyalty to a place where anyone can kill their squad mate at any time? Why would I want to put my life on the line for people who do not care about me? That doesn't make any sense at all. General Melgren can see the outcome of the battle, but not the inevitable rebellion coup that happens right underneath all their noses. It's like he's Alice from Twilight almost, and why does he not see the Venom coming? Why is his dragon perfectly content with just letting the Venom go completely unnoticed this entire book? Doesn't really make a lot of sense. Why would you give your your enemy's powers or leadership roles in your army. I already mentioned this a million times before. There's a weird dichotomy there that they're willing to sacrifice rebellion children, but also their own children at the same time. Why would they want to keep Jack, a liability who hurts other riders, by proxy their dragons and other cadets, who is responsible for the dwindling numbers, and not kill him or demote him? I mentioned this before, he's way more of a liability than Violet ever will be. Isn't killing or hurting the general's daughter treason? Why is it illegal to steal but not kill your own mates? How has Violet lived here her whole life and never once saw Xaden or Taryn? That was a huge part too, is that Violet, she supposedly has lived up as Gaiath her entire life, but she's never seen Taryn, who has made it to Sigale, and they cannot be too far apart for too long or else it physically hurts them. Why has she never seen him even though Xaden and Sigale live at Best-Gaiath War College? Becca Yaros, you made these rules. Why are you breaking them all the time? So this is another thing I thought was pretty interesting. We know that before Violet, Taryn had one more writer, and this was Nolan or something like that, and he was the one who saved Brennan's life, and he died in his stead, which again, why would he do that? I have no idea. But I had this weird thought, and timeline wise, we don't really know how long Xaden has been bonded to Sigale, so I thought it was funny because I was thinking to myself, were Xaden and Nolan hooking up before Violet? Because it would have been a really interesting point to also make Xaden bi if he and Nolan were also hooking up before Violet, because Xaden also knew Brennan, her brother, so they were at the school together. So it's safe to say that Xaden and Nolan would have also been together because Nolan saved Brennan's life. So by proxy, they would have all been at the college together and feeling a certain way every time their dragons hooked up. I thought that was interesting food for thought. So my next question is, what exactly is the Imperium really? They're always mentioned, but we never see them. They're just thrown in there for an extra voice of dragon authority, and they really serve no other purpose to the story overall. That's a huge crux and issue with the story, because you have an entire series named after this dragon council and we never see them, so they are also useless. Alright everyone, that is the end of my Fourth Wing video. How did you guys like it? Did you agree with any of the points I brought up? I apologize it took me so long. I was literally dead to the world for 2 weeks. My voice is still gone, but I'm trying my best to stay healthy and get back on a better filming schedule. I apologize for the lighting as well. I know that could be distracting, but thank you guys so much for sticking to the end. If you did make it all this way, make sure to leave a dragon emoji in the comments. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button down below. I will be coming out with my Onyx Storm deep dive video soon. I promise you guys it's coming. Let me know if there are any other books that you would like to see on my channel. I recently read Deep End by Ali Hazelwood, so I might make a video about that one. The new Hunger Games book is coming out and I pre-ordered it, so I'll be reading that and of course making a video on that soon. If you would like me to do a more conducive deep dive into the book, meaning that I go page by page, chapter by chapter, and really dive deep into the meat of the book, let me know. This is so much fun for me and it is really encouraging to see you guys really enjoy this too. And I have nothing really else to say other than have a great day, and I appreciate you guys.